The autumn breeze swept through downtown Atlanta as Sarah Johnson stood before the gleaming display window of Maxwell's boutique. The 16-year-old honor student from Washington High School had been saving her allowance for 3 months, determined to find the perfect dress for the upcoming state debate championship. Sarah adjusted her navy blue backpack, checking her reflection in the store window. Her natural curls were neatly pulled back in a bun, and she wore her favorite yellow sweater, the one her late mother had given her on her last birthday before the accident. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy glass door, setting off the gentle chime of the store's bell. Inside, the boutique smelled of vanilla and new fabric. Classical music played softly through hidden speakers, and the polished marble floors reflected the warm lighting from crystal chandeliers. Sarah felt slightly out of place among the wealthy-looking shoppers, but she reminded herself that her money was as good as anyone else's. Mrs. Peterson, her debate coach, had suggested Maxwell's boutique specifically because they occasionally had excellent sales in their young women's section. "You need something professional but age-appropriate," Mrs. Peterson had said. "Something that will make the judges take you seriously when you present your arguments about educational reform." As Sarah moved through the racks of clothing, she couldn't help but notice how some of the sales associates seemed to be watching her more closely than they did other customers. She was used to this treatment. Her grandfather had warned her about it, teaching her to always keep her receipts and remain dignified no matter what. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her best friend, Tanya. "Found the perfect dress yet? Remember, you're going to crush that debate." Sarah smiled, typing back a quick "still looking," before returning to her search. Finally, in the back corner of the store, she found it. A knee-length navy blue dress with supple pinstriping and a matching blazer. The price tag made her wince, but it was on sale, marked down 60%. Sarah did the math quickly in her head, a skill she'd inherited from her father, who had been an accountant before the car crash that took both her parents 3 years ago. Taking the dress off the rack, Sarah headed to the fitting room. Ms. Rivera, the fitting room attendant, counted the item and handed her a plastic number card. Inside the small cubicle, Sarah carefully hung up her backpack and changed into the dress. When she looked in the mirror, she gasped softly. The dress fit perfectly, making her look older, more professional, exactly what she needed for the competition. While changing back into her regular clothes, Sarah overheard 2 women talking outside her fitting room. "Did you see the security guard following that girl around?" One whispered. "Well, you can't be too careful these days," the other replied. Sarah's heart sank, but she refused to let their prejudice ruin her excitement about finding the perfect dress. She emerged from the fitting room, thanked Ms. Rivera, and walked to the register with her head held high. Judge William Johnson, her grandfather, had always taught her to carry herself with dignity. "Your education, your manners, and your integrity are things no one can take from you," he would often say. At the counter, Sarah carefully counted out the money she'd saved, babysitting for the neighbors, tutoring younger students in math, and the extra allowance her grandfather gave her for maintaining straight A's. The cashier, a young woman named Beth according to her name tag, seemed surprised when Sarah pulled out the exact amount plus tax. "Would you like the dress in a garment bag?" Beth asked, her tone notably more respectful now that the transaction was complete. Sarah nodded, watching as Beth carefully wrapped the dress in tissue paper before placing it in a protective bag. As she left the store with her purchase, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: pride in finding the perfect dress, sadness at the way some people had treated her, and determination to prove herself at the debate championship. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her grandfather checking in. "How's the shopping going, sweetheart?" Sarah texted back. "Found the perfect dress, Grandpa. Heading home now." She smiled, thinking about how proud he would be to see her in it. The dress represented more than just clothing to her. It was a symbol of her hard work, her dreams, and her determination to succeed despite any obstacles placed in her path. As she waited for the bus, Sarah held her garment bag close, already imagining herself standing at the podium, delivering her arguments with confidence. Little did she know that her next visit to Maxwell's boutique would be under very different circumstances. 3 days later, Sarah returned to Maxwell's boutique during her lunch break. She needed to find a simple pair of black shoes to match her debate dress. The store was busier than her previous visit, with the lunch crowd browsing through the aisles. As Sarah made her way to the shoe section, she noticed the same security guard from before watching her intently. She tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling in her stomach and focused on finding the right shoes. Her debate championship was only 2 days away, and she needed to complete her outfit. While examining a pair of sensible black flats, Sarah heard quick footsteps approaching. She looked up to find the security guard and a police officer walking directly toward her. Her heart started racing, but she remained calm, remembering her grandfather's teachings about maintaining composure in difficult situations. "Miss, we need you to come with us," the security guard said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. "We have reason to believe you've concealed merchandise in your backpack." Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she responded. "There must be a mistake. I haven't taken anything. You can check my backpack." Several customers had stopped to stare, and Sarah could hear their whispers. The police officer, whose name tag read Officer Wilson, stepped forward. "Empty your backpack here, please." His tone was harsh and accusatory, leaving no room for discussion. With shaking hands, Sarah unzipped her backpack. Inside were her school books, a calculator, her lunch container, and a water bottle. She carefully removed each item, placing them on a nearby display table while other customers watched the humiliating scene unfold. "Turn the backpack inside out," Officer Wilson commanded. Sarah complied, fighting back tears as she demonstrated that there was nothing hidden in any compartments. Beth, the cashier who had helped Sarah buy her dress days earlier, watched from behind the counter but said nothing. The store manager, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Hampton, had now joined the group. She was acting suspiciously, the security guard insisted, walking around, looking at items, checking her phone. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had simply been shopping like anyone else. "I have receipts for everything I've ever bought here," Sarah said, her voice stronger now despite her fear. She reached for her phone. "I need to call my grandfather." "Put the phone down," Officer Wilson ordered. "We're not done here." But Sarah had already pressed her grandfather's number on speed dial. The phone rang twice before Judge William Johnson answered. "Grandpa," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly, "I need your help. I'm at Maxwell's boutique, and they're accusing me of stealing." She could hear her grandfather's chair scraping back on his office floor. "Don't say another word, Sarah. I'm on my way." But the officer on the phone. Officer Wilson refused to take the phone, instead directing Sarah to sit in a chair near the manager's office. Customers continued to stare and whisper, some taking out their phones to record the incident. "This is ridiculous," Sarah said firmly, gaining courage from knowing her grandfather was on his way. "I'm an honor student. I've never stolen anything in my life. You're only doing this because I'm black." Mrs. Hampton shifted uncomfortably at Sarah's words, but the security guard doubled down. "We have procedures we need to follow when we suspect theft." The minutes ticked by slowly as Sarah sat in the chair, her school supplies still scattered across the display table, her backpack inside out. She could hear other customers commenting. "Poor girl. They shouldn't just assume. But you never know these days." Sarah sat straight-backed in the chair, dignity intact despite the humiliation. She thought about her upcoming debate topic on systemic racism in modern America. The irony wasn't lost on her. Through the store's front windows, she could see people on the street going about their daily lives, unaware of the drama unfolding inside. Sarah checked the time on the wall clock. 12:45 p.m. Her grandfather's law office was 15 minutes away in good traffic. The air in the store grew increasingly tense as they waited. Sarah knew that everything was about to change when her grandfather walked through those doors. Judge William Johnson had spent his career fighting against exactly this type of injustice, and he wouldn't stand for his granddaughter being treated this way. As if on cue, the store's bell chimed, and all heads turned toward the entrance. Judge William Johnson was in the middle of a crucial consultation with a law firm when his phone rang. The moment he heard Sarah's trembling voice, everything else became secondary. At 68 years old, the retired judge had raised Sarah since she was 13, and he knew instantly from her tone that something was seriously wrong. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he said, already gathering his belongings. The four lawyers sitting across his desk watched in surprise as he abruptly stood up. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority that had marked his 40 years on the bench. As he strode out of the conference room, his secretary, Mrs. Martinez quickly rose from her desk. Judge Johnson, is everything all right? No, Linda, it's not, he replied, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light as he moved swiftly toward the elevator. Sarah's in trouble. Some fools at Maxwell's boutique are accusing her of theft. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. In the parking garage, Judge Johnson's hands shook slightly as he unlocked his Mercedes. Not from fear, but from anger. He had seen too many cases like this during his time on the bench. Young black people wrongly accused, humiliated, their dignity stripped away by prejudice masked as standard procedure. As he navigated through Atlanta's busy streets, memories flooded back. He remembered the day Sarah's parents died, how he promised their graves he would protect their daughter. He remembered teaching Sarah about the realities of being black in America, the extra precautions she would need to take, the injustices she would face. Always keep your receipts, he had told her. Always get the names of people who mistreat you. And always call me if you're in trouble. At a red light, Judge Johnson straightened his bow tie, a habit from his courtroom days. His mind raced through relevant legal precedents and civil rights violations. He had handled similar cases, had seen the damage racial profiling could do to young minds. His phone rang again. It was Sarah. Grandpa, they won't let me leave the chair. They made me empty my backpack in front of everyone. Her voice was stronger now, but he could hear the hurt beneath her composure. You just sit tight, baby girl. Are they recording you? Any security cameras in the store? Yes, there are cameras everywhere. Good. Don't say anything else. I'm 5 minutes away. Judge Johnson's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He thought about Sarah's debate championship coming up, how hard she had worked. She had already lost so much in her young life, her parents, her childhood home, her sense of security. You wouldn't let anyone take her dignity too. Pulling into the parking lot of Maxwell's boutique, he spotted 2 police cars. Their presence only strengthened his resolve. He had faced down tougher opponents in his courtroom, had made decisions that changed lives and laws. Before stepping out of his car, Judge Johnson took a deep breath. He looked at the photo he kept on his dashboard, Sarah at her middle school graduation, beaming beside him in her valedictorian robes. She had her mother's smile and her father's determination. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out his bar association card and his retired judge credentials. In his experience, people tended to think twice about their actions when they realized who they were dealing with. As he walked toward the store entrance, Judge Johnson's mind was clear and focused. He had spent his career fighting for justice, and now he would fight for his granddaughter. He knew that what happened in the next few minutes would either reinforce Sarah's faith in justice or shatter it. The store's bell chimed as he pushed open the door. He could see Sarah sitting near the manager's office, her head held high despite the circumstances. Their eyes met, and he gave her a slight nod, their private signal that everything would be all right. Judge William Johnson straightened his shoulders and prepared to remind everyone in that store about the true meaning of justice. His granddaughter had called for help, and he had answered. Now it was time to show these people exactly why he had been known as one of the most formidable judges in Atlanta's history. The atmosphere in Maxwell's boutique changed instantly when Judge William Johnson entered. His 6'2" frame, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, and his signature bow tie, commanded attention. The whispers among customers ceased, replaced by a heavy silence. Mrs. Hampton, the store manager, was the first to recognize him. Her face paled as she whispered to Officer Wilson, "That's Judge Johnson." The officer's stance shifted subtly. Anyone who had worked in Atlanta law enforcement knew the retired judge's reputation for zero tolerance toward civil rights violations. Judge Johnson walked deliberately toward his granddaughter, his Oxford shoes clicking against the marble floor. He placed his briefcase on a nearby counter and rested his hand gently on Sarah's shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes, Grandpa," Sarah replied, drawing strength from his presence. Turning to face the group, Judge Johnson's voice carried the same authoritative tone that had commanded his courtroom for 4 decades. "I understand you accused my granddaughter of theft. On what grounds?" The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we had reason to believe." "What reason?" Judge Johnson interrupted, his brown eyes sharp beneath his silver brows. "Because she was looking at items? Walking around? Last time I checked, that's called shopping." Officer Wilson stepped forward, attempting to take control of the situation. "Sir, we were just following standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" Judge Johnson's voice remained measured but carried an edge of steel. "Is it standard procedure to humiliate a 16-year-old honor student in public? To make her empty her backpack without probable cause? To deny her the right to make a phone call?" Mrs. Hampton attempted to smooth things over. "Judge Johnson, we have had several incidents of shoplifting recently. My granddaughter purchased a dress here 3 days ago," he continued, reaching into his briefcase. "Here's the receipt. She has been saving her money for months. She came back today to buy shoes for her debate championship. Instead, she's been profiled, harassed, and publicly humiliated." The growing crowd of customers watched the scene unfold. Some had their phones out, recording. A few nodded in agreement with the judge's words. "I spent 40 years on that bench," Judge Johnson continued, his voice carrying throughout the store. "I've seen every kind of discrimination disguised as procedure, every kind of prejudice masked as security concerns, and I've ruled against every single one of them." He turned to address the other customers. "My granddaughter is the debate team captain at Washington High. She tutors younger students in mathematics. She volunteers at the downtown library every weekend. But none of that mattered today, did it? All that mattered was the color of her skin." Beth, the cashier who had sold Sarah the dress, stepped forward. "Judge Johnson, I can confirm that Sarah was here 3 days ago. She was polite and paid in full. I remember her specifically." The judge nodded appreciatively at Beth before turning back to the officer and store management. "Now, we can handle this one of two ways. We can review the security footage right now and clear my granddaughter's name, or we can discuss this matter further in court, with the media present, of course." Mrs. Hampton quickly responded, "We'll review the footage immediately, Your Honor. Please, come to my office." As they prepared to move to the manager's office, Judge Johnson helped Sarah pack her belongings back into her backpack. He noticed her hands were still shaking slightly. "Remember what I taught you," he whispered to her. "Your worth isn't determined by their prejudice. We're stronger than this moment." Sarah straightened her yellow sweater and stood tall beside her grandfather. The same customers who had stared at her in suspicion now looked away, embarrassed by their assumptions. Judge Johnson placed his hand on Sarah's back, guiding her toward the manager's office. His presence had transformed the situation, but he knew this wasn't just about clearing Sarah's name. This was about ensuring that no other young person would face the same treatment in this store. As they walked, he could hear customers murmuring about calling corporate headquarters and sharing the video online. Sometimes, he thought, justice needed an audience to truly take effect. Inside Mrs. Hampton's office, tension filled the air as the security footage played on a large monitor. Judge Johnson stood behind Mrs. Hampton's chair, his hands clasped behind his back, while Sarah sat quietly beside him. Officer Wilson and the security guard positioned themselves near the door, their earlier confidence noticeably diminished. "Start from when my granddaughter entered the store today," Judge Johnson instructed, his eyes fixed on the screen. The footage showed Sarah walking in at 12:15 p.m., heading directly to the shoe section. Nothing in her behavior suggested suspicious activity. Mrs. Hampton fast-forwarded through several minutes of footage, showing Sarah examining different pairs of shoes. Then, something caught Judge Johnson's eye. "Stop, rewind that section," he commanded. The footage rewound to show another young woman, wearing a red jacket, moving suspiciously through the aisles near Sarah. While Sarah was focused on the shoes, this woman kept glancing around and slipping small items into her large purse. "That's your shoplifter," Judge Johnson said firmly. "She left the store 10 minutes before you accosted my granddaughter. You were so busy profiling the wrong person, you let the actual thief walk right out." Mrs. Hampton's face reddened as she zoomed in on the woman in red. The security guard leaned forward, finally recognizing the person they should have been watching. "Play the footage from 3 days ago," Sarah spoke up for the first time since entering the office. "When I bought my dress." The manager obliged, pulling up the earlier footage. It clearly showed Sarah at the register with Beth, counting out her money carefully and leaving with her properly purchased dress in a garment bag. Officer Wilson cleared his throat. "Judge Johnson, Miss Johnson, I believe we owe you both an apology." "An apology?" Judge Johnson's voice was calm but carried weight. My granddaughter was targeted, humiliated, and treated like a criminal. She was denied her rights and subjected to discrimination in front of dozens of witnesses. He turned to Mrs. Hampton. How many other innocent young people have been profiled in your store? How many didn't have someone to call for help? Mrs. Hampton began typing rapidly on her keyboard. I'm drafting an official apology right now. We'll also be reviewing all our security protocols and implementing mandatory bias training for all staff. That's a start, Judge Johnson nodded. But I want the security footage from the past 3 months. I want to review every similar incident that's occurred in this store. Sarah watched her grandfather work, admiring how he turned her humiliation into an opportunity for change. This was why he had been such a respected judge. He didn't just solve problems, he prevented them from happening again. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. Sir, about the actual shoplifter. Yes, Judge Johnson turned to Officer Wilson. I suggest you focus your attention on finding the woman in the red jacket. Her face is clearly visible on the cameras. That's your real suspect. Mrs. Hampton printed out several documents, the incident report, the apology letter, and still images from the security footage showing the real shoplifter. As she handed them to Judge Johnson, her hands trembled slightly. We'll need copies of all of this, he said, reviewing the papers. And I expect significant changes in how this store operates moving forward. Sarah stood up, her dignity restored by the evidence. The security footage had proven what she knew all along. She was innocent, targeted simply because of her appearance. One more thing, Judge Johnson added, turning to Officer Wilson. I want body camera footage from every officer who responded to this call. That's not a request, it's a requirement. As they prepared to leave the office, Sarah noticed the time, 2:30 p.m. She had missed her afternoon classes, but she had witnessed something more educational than any lesson, the power of justice when properly pursued. The footage continued to play silently on the monitor, showing the stark contrast between Sarah's innocent shopping and the actual thief's behavior. It served as undeniable evidence of the store's misplaced suspicions and rushed judgments. Judge Johnson gathered the documents, placing them carefully in his briefcase. This isn't over, he said quietly to Mrs. Hampton. This is just the beginning of some necessary changes in your establishment. The truth had been revealed through the unblinking eye of the security cameras, proving what Sarah had known all along. Sometimes justice just needs the right person to uncover it. With the security footage evidence in hand, Judge Johnson led Sarah back into the main store area. The customers who had witnessed her earlier humiliation were still present, many now whispering among themselves about the unfolding events. Judge Johnson's voice carried through the store as he addressed the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make something very clear. Today, you all witnessed an innocent young woman being wrongfully accused and publicly humiliated. The security footage has proven what my granddaughter said all along. She did nothing wrong. Mrs. Hampton and Officer Wilson stood uncomfortably nearby as the judge continued. This isn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern of behavior that needs to stop. He turned to face the store manager directly. In the past year alone, how many young people of color have been stopped in your store? How many have been forced to empty their bags? How many have been humiliated in front of other customers? Mrs. Hampton's face flushed. I don't have those exact numbers. Then perhaps it's time we get them, Judge Johnson replied. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number. Hello, Marcus? Yes, it's Bill Johnson. I need you to pull up every incident report from Maxwell's boutique for the past 12 months. Yes, every single one. Sarah watched as her grandfather worked, amazed at how quickly he could mobilize resources. Marcus Taylor was a civil rights attorney who had once clerked for her grandfather. The security guard attempted to interject. Sir, we were just doing our jobs. Your job, Judge Johnson cut him off, is to protect the store and its customers, not to target innocent shoppers based on their race. The real shoplifter, who is clearly visible in your security footage, walked out of here while you were busy harassing my granddaughter. Several customers nodded in agreement. One elderly woman stepped forward. I shop here regularly, and I've seen this happen before. It's not right. Officer Wilson, who had been quiet since leaving the office, finally spoke up. Judge Johnson, I want to acknowledge that we handled this situation poorly. The department will be reviewing our response protocols. Indeed, you will, the judge replied. Because this isn't just about today. This is about every time someone walks into this store and is judged not by their actions, but by their appearance. Sarah stepped forward, finding her voice. I saved for months to buy my debate dress here. I was a paying customer, but none of that mattered because of how I look. Judge Johnson placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. My granddaughter is absolutely right. And now, Mrs. Hampton, we're going to discuss concrete changes. He pulled out a small notebook and began listing demands. First, immediate bias training for all staff members. Second, a complete review of your security protocols. Third, a written apology to be posted prominently in the store. Fourth, a community meeting to address these issues openly. Mrs. Hampton nodded repeatedly, knowing the store's reputation was at stake. We'll implement all of these changes immediately. And finally, Judge Johnson added, I want a scholarship program established. The money you've made profiling innocent customers should go toward helping those same communities. The store had grown quiet as everyone listened to the judge's words. Even the background music seemed to have fallen silent. This isn't just about making changes on paper, he continued. It's about changing the culture that allows this kind of discrimination to happen in the first place. Sarah watched as her grandfather transformed her personal humiliation into a moment of community change. This was why he had been such a respected judge. He saw beyond individual incidents to address systemic problems. Mrs. Hampton, now visibly shaken, agreed to all the demands. We'll start implementing these changes today. Good, Judge Johnson replied, because I'll be watching. And I'm not the only one. He gestured to the customers who had recorded the earlier incident on their phones. As they prepared to leave the store, Sarah noticed something had changed. The same people who had stared at her with suspicion now looked at her with respect and admiration. Her grandfather had turned her moment of shame into a catalyst for change. Judge Johnson gathered his briefcase and turned to Mrs. Hampton one final time. Remember this day. Remember how easily prejudice can disguise itself as procedure. And remember that justice always finds its way to the light. The next morning, the local media gathered outside Maxwell's boutique. News vans lined the street as reporters waited for the store's official statement. Inside, Mrs. Hampton stood behind a podium that had been hastily set up near the entrance. Sarah and Judge Johnson arrived just before the press conference began. They had spent the previous evening discussing how to turn this incident into meaningful change. Sarah had barely slept, but her eyes were bright with determination. On behalf of Maxwell's boutique, Mrs. Hampton began, her voice trembling slightly. I want to extend our deepest apologies to Sarah Johnson and her family. Yesterday's incident was inexcusable and revealed serious flaws in our security procedures and staff training. Cameras flashed as Mrs. Hampton continued greeting from her prepared statement. Behind her, the store's front window now displayed a large sign announcing new anti-discrimination policies and the establishment of the Maxwell's Community Scholarship Fund. The actual shoplifter, as it turned out, had been apprehended that morning at another store across town. Officer Wilson, who had arrived to make the announcement, looked directly at Sarah. Miss Johnson, we owe you an apology as well. The police department is implementing new training protocols to prevent similar incidents. Judge Johnson stood beside his granddaughter as reporters called out questions. One journalist raised her hand. Sarah, how do you feel about the store's response? Sarah stepped forward to the microphone, her voice clear and confident. What happened to me happens to many young people of color every day. The difference is, most don't have a former judge for a grandfather. I hope the changes being made here will protect others from experiencing what I did. The store's corporate office had acted swiftly after videos of the incident went viral. The regional manager flew in from Chicago to announce additional changes. Mandatory monthly bias training for all employees, a new community advisory board, and the scholarship program Judge Johnson had demanded. Local civil rights organizations praised the response but emphasized the need for ongoing vigilance. Marcus Taylor, Judge Johnson's former clerk, announced his firm would provide free legal assistance to any victims of retail profiling in the city. Mrs. Hampton approached Sarah after the press conference. We found something interesting in our security footage review, she said, handing Sarah a folder. In the past year, we had over 50 similar incidents. 90% involved young people of color. We're sharing this data with researchers at the local university. Sarah took the folder, realizing it contained exactly what they needed, proof that her experience wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern that needed addressing. The security guard who had accused Sarah had been reassigned to a different location and enrolled in extensive training. Beth, the cashier who had spoken up for Sarah, was promoted to assistant manager with a specific focus on customer relations and anti-discrimination policies. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat in her grandfather's study, watching the news coverage on his desktop computer. The incident had sparked a citywide conversation about retail profiling. Other stores were voluntarily reviewing their security practices, and the city council announced plans to discuss new anti-discrimination regulations. "You handled yourself well today," Judge Johnson said, placing a cup of hot chocolate on the desk beside her. "Your parents would be proud." Sarah smiled, thinking about her upcoming debate championship. "You know what, Grandpa? I think I'm going to change my debate topic. Instead of educational reform, I want to talk about systemic racism in retail environments. I have first-hand experience now." Judge Johnson nodded approvingly. Sometimes the most powerful arguments come from personal experience. Just remember to focus on solutions, not just problems. As the day drew to a close, Sarah received messages from classmates and teachers offering support. Her debate team coach called to check on her and enthusiastically approved her topic change. The incident that had started as a nightmare had transformed into something powerful, a catalyst for change, a platform for discussion, and a reminder that justice sometimes needs a push to move forward. Mrs. Hampton's final words at the press conference echoed in Sarah's mind. "We can't change what happened yesterday, but we can ensure it never happens again tomorrow." For Sarah, tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But for now, she sat in her grandfather's study, drinking hot chocolate and watching as their small act of standing up for justice rippled out into the wider world, creating waves of change they had only begun to imagine. 2 months after the incident at Maxwell's boutique, Sarah stood at the podium of the state debate championship. The navy blue dress she had purchased that fateful day fit perfectly, now representing something far more significant than just competition attire. "Retail profiling isn't just about stolen merchandise," she began, her voice steady and strong. "It's about stolen dignity, stolen trust, and stolen innocence. But today, I'm here to talk about solutions." In the audience, Judge Johnson sat proudly watching his granddaughter. Besides him sat Mrs. Hampton, who had become an unexpected ally in their fight against retail discrimination. The store manager had taken their experience and turned it into a mission for change. Sarah's presentation included statistics from Maxwell's internal review, combined with her personal experience. She proposed a comprehensive three-point plan: mandatory bias training for retail workers, transparent reporting of security incidents, and community oversight boards for major retailers. The judges leaned forward, captivated by her argument. In the 2 months since her wrongful accusation, Sarah had helped establish the Youth Retail Justice Coalition, IRJC, a student-led organization that worked with stores to prevent profiling incidents. "Maxwell's boutique is now a model for other retailers," Sarah continued. "Their scholarship program has already helped 5 students attend college. Their new security protocols have eliminated racial profiling while actually improving theft prevention through better technology and training." The changes hadn't stopped at one store. Inspired by Sarah's story, the City Council had passed the Retail Fairness Act, requiring all major retailers to implement anti-discrimination policies and regular staff training. Other cities were now considering similar legislation. After winning first place in the debate championship, Sarah returned to Maxwell's boutique for the first meeting of their community advisory board. The store had been transformed. New signs welcomed customers in multiple languages, and the security team now included members from diverse backgrounds. "You've turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change," her grandfather said as they walked through the store. The same security cameras that had cleared her name now displayed a notice about the store's commitment to fair treatment of all customers. The YRJC had grown to include students from every high school in the city. They conducted workshops, shared experiences, and worked with retailers to improve their practices. Sarah's story had become a case study in effective advocacy and community organizing. Beth, now the assistant manager, had become a key ally in their efforts. She helped develop a training program that used real incidents to teach employees about unconscious bias and fair treatment. The security guard who had accused Sarah had personally apologized and now spoke at training sessions about learning from his mistakes. One afternoon, as Sarah led a YRJC meeting in the store's community room, a space that hadn't existed before the incident, a young girl approached her. "I saw what happened to you on the news," the girl said. "Because of you, I'm not afraid to go shopping anymore." That moment crystallized everything for Sarah. Her personal humiliation had become a source of empowerment for others. The scholarship fund had grown beyond Maxwell's boutique, with other retailers contributing to support students from marginalized communities. Judge Johnson watched his granddaughter with pride as she mentored younger students and spoke at community events. She had taken his lessons about justice and transformed them into action, creating change that went far beyond one store or one incident. As the school year drew to a close, Sarah received news that her debate presentation had been selected for a National Youth Leadership Conference. She would be speaking to students from across the country about turning personal challenges into community solutions. "You know what, Grandpa?" Sarah said one evening as they shared dinner. "That day at the store was terrible, but look at all the good that came from it. We didn't just fix one problem, we started a whole movement." Judge Johnson smiled, remembering his years on the bench. "That's how real change happens, Sarah. Not just by pointing out what's wrong, but by bringing people together to make things right." The incident at Maxwell's boutique had become more than a story of racial profiling. It had become a testament to the power of standing up for justice, the importance of community action, and the ability of one person to create lasting change. As Sarah prepared for the national conference, she knew that her journey was far from over, but she had learned the most important lesson of all. That change begins with one person willing to stand up, speak out, and work for something better.